episode of the Enrich Your Journey podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Monahan. I believe this is our 12th episode. Thank you all for your continued support. It's been a lot of fun, still having some amazing guests, as I do today, hopefully bringing you ideas to enrich your journey, be it financial planning or any other topics that I am getting requests on. I'm really excited to have Sophy Raza join us today. Sophy's a good friend. We've done a lot of business together in the past, and an expert attorney on particularly divorces, which is what our topic will be today. I thought we'd start, as I always do, just introducing Sophy. I'll kind of have her tell her story, her background. I love, as you all know, sharing stats to kind of set the stage. So I've got some stats to talk about as it relates to divorce, and then really just kind of adding some financial planning color around. Obviously, if you're considering divorce, you're going through divorce, financial planning is obviously a massive critical component to that. So I want to make sure that we touch base on that. So with further ado, Sophy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So I just thought, if you would just kind of give your background. Obviously, you have your own firm, and kind of tell us how you got started and what's going on in the firm these days.
Sure. Well, I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was younger, trying to negotiate a deal with my mom and my sister over a hair perm. So that kind of sparked my interest in the law, and I sort of continued wanting an interest in the law throughout college. After college, I worked at Edgewood Children's Center, which was here in St. Louis. It's no longer here, and got to work a lot with families in that job. I was responsible for teenage girls. They were taken out of their home and put in this facility because of abuse, stuff that had been done to them. So that kind of sparked my interest. So I applied to law school after that, and always wanted to do family law from the very beginning. I worked at a small solo law firm when I was in law school, and then got a job afterwards at a mid-sized firm in Clayton. So I've been doing family law now for over 22 years. I do have my own firm now, and we exclusively represent men and women going through any kind of family law issue. Got it.
That's kind of interesting, because there are attorneys that will specialize in men or women, right?
Correct. There are a couple. One comes to mind in St. Louis that really market towards men. There are differences, I think, in representing men or women, but I represent both. Sometimes I'll have more women, sometimes I'll have more men. It just kind of ebbs and flows.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing your background. Let's kind of start. I'll just kind of share some stats and debunk the taboo, if you will. Obviously, it's pretty prevalent, so it's not anything that anybody watching should be ashamed of talking about if they're obviously considering it, or even in the process currently, or post-divorce matters still going on with them. So there's a lot of, I always hear people say that half of marriages don't last. Mm-hmm. It's actually less than that. This is just a couple years old here by Forbes magazine, but it's 43% of first marriages don't last. It's a rate of about 6 to 7 people per 1,000. This is just in the U.S. And so a couple other stats here. The average age is about 46 for men, 44 for women. So pretty similar there. That probably doesn't surprise you much.
No, not at all. No, I would say the vast majority of my clients are in their 40s or 50s.
40s. I did learn the term gray divorce is for folks that divorce over 50.
Over 50, yeah.
I'd not heard that one before. Third marriages have the highest divorce of 73%. I think you mentioned second. It continues to go up even after second.
Right. I typically find with second marriages, absent a prenuptial agreement, which is a great idea if you're going to second marriage, but you're typically talking about blending families when you have a second marriage. Both of you likely have kids. That's much harder to navigate and to create a household with 2 families and 2 sets of kids. So I think that's why you see the higher rate of divorce for second marriages.
Makes sense. This is one that caught my eye just because of the transactions that we've worked on with you introducing me to folks and clients. Women are more likely to pay a financial price when a marriage ends because they are more likely to compromise or limit their careers due to homemaking responsibilities. And I know you've represented a lot of women as well. I'm curious, is that your experience too, where you have found that usually the women potentially they pay a greater price. They net maybe less. And what's your experience there? Why is that?
I think if you are a stay-at-home mom and you've been a stay-at-home mom throughout your marriage and then you're looking at divorce, I think that's probably the worst position you can be in as a litigant in a divorce. The court is going to expect you to become employed and to meet your own expenses. So, compared to when I first started doing this, I think I have one stay-at-home mom client right now, and that's it out of all the women. And I think typically earlier in my career, you'd see a lot more stay-at-home moms, kind of the traditional mom stayed at home, husband get this big career, wife's work allowed him to get that. But these days, I'm seeing mostly dual income families and really, really less women that stay at home. One factor that also I think goes into that is that Missouri is now a default 50-50 custody state. So even if you've been a stay-at-home mom, you're not likely going to get more than 50% custody with your kids. So I think that affects a lot of people's decisions as well to go out in the workforce and become employed.
And we see that on our end too. Obviously, a lot more dual income earners. But you said something that was interesting. That the court likely will expect them to become employed.
Correct. So there is a spousal support statute in Missouri that basically the court will look at your education, your employment, your background, and based on those factors, what could you earn if you go out into the world and get a job? And you can choose not to work, but the court is going to treat you at an income. So if you don't have that income, your child support is going to be less because it's based on that income. Your spousal support would also be less based on that income. And there is an affirmative duty for the maintenance receiving spouse to become self-supporting. So even though you may be giving maintenance right off the bat, it's likely that you're going to get hit with a motion to modify from your spouse at some point to try to decrease that maintenance as your earning potential goes up.
And I know we've seen that on cases you and I have worked together. I just did not. It's new news to me. I didn't realize the court, that's factored in everything, because that could be, I can imagine that's really challenging, right? If the spouse, I won't even call it the wife, but typically it is, has been a homemaker raising the children all these years, and you're out of the workforce. I mean, it's hard to get back in the workforce.
Well, and they're going to look on that. So let's say you don't even have a college degree. You stayed at home for 30 years, something like that. Those cases, the court's not going to expect so much out of that spouse because they really, truly have given up their entire career. I think, the younger spouses that have been out of the workforce for maybe 5 or 10 years are going to be expected to go back and to become self-supporting.
Got it.
But, when you're looking at someone who doesn't have a college degree and they have to go back to work, you're probably looking at retail, maybe $20,000 a year, minimum wage, something like that. Yep. It's not going to be a whole lot based on, as opposed to like someone who has a college degree, maybe worked a little bit and then stayed at home.
Ranger. Yeah. So is it worth it? I assume it's worth it to go back, even if it's an hourly arrangement, to not get as dinged as much on the maintenance or the overall package. I mean, if the spouse is sitting there and says, I haven't worked forever, I don't really want to go work retail because I'm 55 years old, but even if I go make $20,000, it doesn't affect my maintenance. I guess they have to make a decision in working with you as their attorney on, I probably should go do that because the outcome, and I've got my financial planner hat on now, the outcome is worse for me if I don't go work at all.
Yeah. There are family law attorneys in the area who will tell their stay-at-home mom spouses not to get a job. I really, really, really disagree with that. And I was also raised by a mom who didn't go to college and didn't work outside the home. And so she really instilled in my sister and I, you need to be self-supporting, you need to be independent, you need to do all of that. And I share that philosophy. So, I think you're really only hurting yourself by staying at home. I wish more women would maybe consider that when they make the decision to stay at home, because I do see, if you look at the two spouses' net worth at the end of divorce over time, the husband, let's say in this case, his net worth's going to go like this, and the woman's is going to go straight down because she's having to spend assets to meet her monthly obligation.
And that's the key, is it's because you're spending assets and not living off of income, which obviously significantly preserves your assets at the time of divorce.
Right. And I have some clients who say, I'll never go back to work. I don't care. I'll make it work. And, they certainly can do that. But, maintenance in any scenario is going to end at some date, and you've got to figure out what are you going to do once that ends.
And importantly, you also mentioned that if they do not go back to work, most of these deals, divorces, are modifiable.
Correct.
So they're going to try to come back. The higher income earner or the only income earner is going to try to likely come back and modify that to be earlier or decreased.
Definitely. So I see people filing modifications maybe 5 to 7 years after the divorce. The mom has gotten some time to be out in the workforce, and then I'm being very stereotypical. The husband comes back to modify that. And then I see a lot of modifications about at the age of retirement, because the higher income earning spouse wants to retire, can't afford to continue to pay the maintenance. So there's a lot of modifications around that time as well. And in that scenario, the stay-at-home spouse is likely going to get retirement assets around that age anyway. So it generally will offset.
Yep.
Maintenance may be ending, but you're also at the age where you can pull from your retirement.
Yep. One of the financial planning, the really the most prevalent one, most important one, I think, that we start immediately when you refer me somebody an opportunity, is going through their cash flow projections, particularly if they are not planning on going back to work. Because you just said, if they come into whatever the lump sum is and they're 48-year-old, very healthy, male or female, whatever the case, that can go really quick. The other thing a lot of these stats talk about is your standard of living changes immediately, because you've been accustomed to this household income, whether it's dual earning or just one significant income that you no longer have. And there's a lot of psychology that also comes along with that too. In my experience working with divorcees, is you have to be willing to either go back to work or go back to work and modify your lifestyle. And that's really, really hard to do.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind. So the law in Missouri does say that spousal support should be set at a level that is the level of spending that you had during the marriage. But if you look at most married couples, there isn't enough money to go around for both people to have houses.
Separately,
there
right.
are those people that make enough money that it's going to be fine and you're not going to have a big decrease in your standard of living. But for most people, your standard of living is going to be significantly less than it was, because there's just only one income for two households at that point.
Yep. So we can go through a scenario and, they have $2, $3, $4, $5 million. But again, in my example, they're 48, they're healthy, their parents are still alive in their late 80s. It goes pretty quick.
Yeah.
And then it gets into discussion, which can be tough, is you have to reduce your budget again, or you need to go back to work. I mean, Those are the only two, we can't sit here and guarantee them that we're going to make this rate of return, that they can't, they don't need to go back to work, right?
Yeah.
You never say that. And
I think the most important thing for people seeking spousal support is to know your budget. That's the most important thing, is to really, and not just throw numbers on a spreadsheet, but really go through in detail your last 12 months of spending, hit your credit cards, your bank accounts, make a Quicken report, or in a lot of cases, as an attorney, I will do these reports for people just to make sure that you know exactly how much you need. So it's not a big shock when you get that amount at the end and you can't meet your expenses.
Yep. It's so great. So, the cash flow is step number one, but step two definitely is budgeting that we go to. And I feel like sometimes we, they might be crabby with you and or I, or both of us, because, they're 55-year-old and we're telling them they need to go through a budget and they haven't done that in 20, 30 years.
Right.
But the reason you and I are asking for that is because it literally makes a massive impact to their future.
Right. And I think, stereotypically, in a stay-at-home mom situation, the husband is the one dealing with the finances. So you might not even know what your expenses are or what is in your bank account. You really need to do some research and really, gather statements of all your assets and get your bank statements and credit card statements so you can prepare a budget or have someone prepare a budget for you.
Yeah, that's really good information. I love, too, that it's super important, if you heard that earlier, just about how Sophy encourages everyone she talks to come into with the mindset that you probably should start employment or continue employment through the divorce. And that's interesting that you said a lot of attorneys don't necessarily encourage that.
I see it all the time. I tell every single one of my clients, even be looking, even if you're not going to take a job right now, just look for a job. Because the other thing is, even if they're looking for a job, then you know where to maybe set their income at. Maybe the other spouse thinks they can earn 80, but the jobs they're finding are only 30. That's something your attorney should know. So you're not, preparing a client that she's going to earn 80 when she's really not, and she's going to earn 30. So that's good evidence to have too. I've sent these applications out. These are the offers I'm getting. That helps to set your income at a reasonable level.
Yeah, that's good. This is an interesting one. We're talking about Missouri. We obviously reside in St. Louis. The highest divorce rate by state, Nevada.
Yeah,
You got Vegas there.
I mean, since it's so easy to get married, I guess maybe it's easier to get divorced there too.
Divorces. Lowest divorce rate state, Louisiana.
Huh.
Kind of random.
Interesting.
Divorce rate steadily decreased from 40% to 30% as income increases. I found that really interesting. I actually would have thought it would have been the opposite of that. Typically, I mean, most of the clientele we're talking with are higher income, higher net worth people, and I feel like as life maybe gets your net worths get larger or complex life, I would think that rate would actually go up, but apparently it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, I guess you could say there's less to fight about because there's more money to go around, whereas a lot of people's marriages fail because they argue about finances. So I could see it from that regard. But yeah, I would think the higher net worth you are, probably the more complicated your life is to some extent.
Yeah. And the last one I'll share from my Nerd Corner stats is 70% of divorces are initiated by women.
Yep.
That was interesting.
I think that's though it's very true.
Kind of a mix of the average age and female to male. It's still, majority of them are started by females.
Yeah, I recently read an article. I can't remember where I saw it, but it was basically talking about women are initiating divorces because stereotypically, even if they're dual income earners, the majority of the housework still is falling on the female. So from a female's perspective, she's like, I could get divorced and cut my work in half, because I'm only going to have the kids 50% of the time, and I don't have to do everything for my husband anymore. So I think that factors into a lot why women are initiating divorces more than men currently.
Yeah. Let's talk about if you're watching this right now and you are early phases of thinking about it, or your late phases of you're getting ready to call an attorney. What can these folks, is there a checklist? What should they be doing to get ready?
I think the first thing is to meet with an attorney. I always recommend that they meet with at least 2 or 3 different attorneys. You're going to be telling your most deepest secrets to this person. You really have to trust them and feel like they have your back. And I think if you just meet with one, you're not getting a taste of what else is out there. Yeah. So I always tell people, ask friends, ask family, ask coworkers who they've used, word of mouth kind of thing. You can Google, these days everyone has a website and all their information is online. And I think starting to make those meetings, making your budget and compiling an asset and debt worksheet, I think is also really important to have that information before you go in to meet with the attorney, so the attorney can see the specific issues that may be involved. In that case, I think those are the most important things to do before you file or do anything like that.
Okay. And then 2 thoughts from that. One would be, hiring an attorney can be intimidating to people if they've never hired an attorney. When you're doing those consults, is it normal for those, are those complimentary where you're literally just sitting down with somebody and learning their story, or should people expect that to be a fee? Like, how does that typically work in the industry?
Yeah, my first consults are paid. I think most attorneys are paid. Okay. My rate for those consults though is lower than my hourly rate.
Okay.
And I spend an hour with them and go through everything that any questions they have and that kind of thing. I even will give them other recommendations of people to talk to. I really want them to do their homework and do their research and pick whoever they're most comfortable with.
Got it. I love the objectivity of making sure they're talking to numerous people, even if it's another attorney.
Right.
And it makes sense. You have to get paid for the hour. I totally get that. I think there shouldn't be a reason for it to be intimidating because you're not signing anything. It's literally just a conversation. It's very cost effective to do that. And I guarantee you in that 1 hour, they're going to walk away with a ton of really helpful information.
Yeah. The first meeting is, typically an hour. It's a lot of information. So I'm a little careful about how much information I go into because I think people are already emotional and overwhelmed when they're coming into your office to meet with a divorce attorney. Most people have never met with an attorney and never been to court. I try to keep the information pretty general. If some people come in with very specific questions as to their situation, so I will address those. But I spend a lot of the time in that first meeting actually talking about the different process options, the different ways you can get divorced, because it's not, used to be the case where you had to go to court and that was it. It's not the case anymore. There's a lot of different options that you can take. So I do spend quite a bit of time because most people don't know that there are several different ways to get divorced other than court.
Yep. Let's go to those in a moment. My other thought was when you're preparing potentially to go talk to an attorney for the first time, when the spouse is generating their information, I assume the answer is yes, but do you typically encourage people to try to do that on their own, or are you encouraging them, if you're at this step already, and it's not a really nasty potential divorce, maybe work with them to start gathering the information? Or are you counseling them, go get all this information, but do it on your own until we actually file?
I see both. There are people that are very on top of their finances and they can immediately give you a spreadsheet of everything.
Yep.
And then there's people that have never looked at it before. So, I have several clients where we have to really walk them through that entire process because they have no idea even where to start. Yep. So, it runs the gamut of the really, really prepared and the people that really don't know that much. So we can help. I always do, especially if it's a high net worth client, try to get a financial planner involved very early on in the situation. So that person is kind of living the divorce with you and can be available for any questions as they come up. I think that's really an important person to have on your side. Typically, if people have a married couple have a financial advisor, that person is only going to represent one of the people after the divorce. Yep. So especially if you're the person that doesn't have the relationship with that financial planner, your attorney is a good place to start with getting referrals for a financial planner.
That's good.
And then if you don't know your expenses, your income, and your assets, your financial planner, probably at a lower rate than your attorney, can compile your budget and your assets and debts.
Yep. And that's one thing we try to help with too, and experience working together, is just utilize an advisor just to be a resource during that period. Obviously, it's an opportunity for me, so I'm going to help out as much as I possibly can, educating them, budgeting. We spend a lot of time on cash flow, as I mentioned. And regardless of that should be, to your point, should be very cost effective from the advisor's side. But hopefully, the divorcee understands the value of seeing a lot of that, the financials, and again, starting to try to change their mindset of post-divorce.
Right. And if you have assets that you need someone to manage and invest and everything, you are going to need this person anyway. Right. So right. I think I try to get a financial planner involved as early as possible because I think that helps us prepare the spouse to be better prepared for what the post-divorce finances look like.
Yep. Let's talk about the types, because it has very much modernized in the last maybe 5 to 7 years. I mean, you mentioned earlier I don't want to call it the old school way of just everything is going to court. Yeah. Your court dates are every 3 to 4 months. You're waiting on if the court gets backed up. I know sometimes here in Missouri they do, but there are a lot more what I'll call modern, if that's fair, other options that maybe folks watching aren't familiar with.
Yeah, so the rule in St. Louis County and city, I would say, is that the family law cases have to be finished within a year of filing. If you are in St. Charles County, Jefferson County, Franklin County, they don't adhere to that very much. So your case could literally been going on for several years. So if you want more control over the process, there are different mediation options and also an option called collaborative law. So mediation is where there is a neutral mediator in the room and then husband and wife. So you can choose to have your attorneys with you in the room. If you can't be in the same room, you can be in separate rooms and the mediator can kind of shuffle back and forth. But that's sort of an out of court, alternative dispute resolution process. You have a series of meetings for 2 hours at a time. And you go through everything in divorce and reach agreements, and then the mediator drafts everything at the end, and then your attorney files everything with the court to process it. I would say in my experience, mediation is typically cheaper and quicker than court. I hesitate to say every single situation, but I would say in almost every single situation, it's cheaper and quicker. Because especially if you don't have your attorneys with you and your spouse are just mediating, you're only paying for the mediator and that's it. you're not each paying 2 attorneys. Obviously, that gets more expensive if your attorneys are there and the mediator shuffling back and forth. Collaborative law is completely out of court as well, and you actually sign a contract that you are not going to go to court. You're not going to file in court while this process is going on. You each hire an attorney who is trained in collaborative law. So as an attorney that does collaborative law, I've had to go through pretty extensive training on basically how to not be a litigation lawyer. And it's basically how to collaborate with a team and to help these people reach decisions rather than having a positional bargaining, like I want the house, no, I want the house. We get into more, why do you want the house? Why is that important to you? And are there any other options that we could look at rather, other than giving the house to one of you that would, reach your goals for the process?
So if you're, I guess the question of it's more cost effective. It sounds like it's more timely. You're not at the mercy of court costs. You're not at the mercy of court scheduling. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't more people do that? Are you seeing the more contentious ones, the hairier ones, the larger ones, still go through the traditional way? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say trying to do mediation in a very complicated case can happen, but it's probably unlikely. I think collaborative law is better suited. In collaborative law, I forgot to mention, not only do you have your 2 attorneys trained in collaborative law, you have a financial professional that's part of the team, and you also have a coach that's part of the team. So the coach is a mental health professional. So if you think about, you're paying a financial person, 2 attorneys, and a coach to sit in every meeting, collaborative can get just as expensive as court. So I just want to make sure that was clear. But I think collaborative is very well suited for the most difficult cases. I think you get people who are really experienced in the specific issues, like if there's addiction, if there's alcohol, if there's abuse, if there's special needs kids, all these kinds of things, you can bring those professionals onto the team and you're going to get a lot more individualized attention and work than you are in court. In court, you're each going to hire your own experts to say what you want to say, and it's going to be a battle of the expert, and you're each going to pay for all this trial time, and then the judge who you've never met is going to make a decision about your life. So, mediation and collaborative law gives you a lot more control over what that outcome is. There are definitely cases that cannot go to mediation or collaborative law. I would say situations of domestic violence, you can't have those people in a room together. There's just an imbalance of power, and it would just not go well. So I would never send a client who has been verbally abused or physically abused by their spouse. I would never send him or her into a room with that person. Yeah. But I actually find that collaborative law is great on the most horrendous cases. I've actually seen it work wonders, and people are able to still reach agreements without having to go through all the uncertainty of court.
Got it. Another thing I've learned, another resource on the teams is called a tracing expert. Mm-hmm. So if you're watching this, here's a tidbit to save you time and money. Great attorneys like Sophy will hire a tracing expert if one of the spouses believes there is money being hid somewhere. So the I guess the tidbit is don't do it because it'll be found, right? And it just ends up taking so much more time.
Yes.
And these tracing experts are sounds like they're becoming used more and more, and they're going to find it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We use tracing people for that scenario, and also for, let's say you had some retirement prior to the marriage and after the marriage. So they kind of build a spreadsheet of what percentage of that account is marital versus non-marital and all of that kind of thing.
Yep. Trying to get to the final number. Yep. So if we can, I'm going to go through just from my side, the financial planning, just a few things to consider as well. And then we can kind of wrap up with any other considerations that you may have. So one of the things that we always do when we first sit down with somebody that's going through divorce is making sure that everybody understands what is in the divorce decree. Obviously that is, laying out, it's the game plan, right? It's the guidebook of what it's all going to look like, the financials of it. Make sure you have an inventory of all of your assets and liabilities. I know that can be really early on in the process. It should be early on in the process, but sometimes things come up later on. Just make sure you understand, exactly where everything is. And then we, as a financial advisor, when we do get involved, we start creating a plan pretty early, a lot of times before it's even filed, because that enables you as their attorney and the divorcee, your client, you're making decisions based off of the plan they were creating for themselves going forward,
Right.
and not as a couple. And there's a lot of things I mentioned, the cash flow. Another big one that we see is making sure that we understand where all accounts are, how they're titled. This is often missed post-divorce. All the beneficiary information is a lot of times neglected to be updated, and they still have each other, and they don't want each other on their accounts.
Most attorneys have some magic language that we put in the agreements that all beneficiary designations are revoked, but you really, just to avoid any problems, want to make sure that you're updating your beneficiaries. Generally, life insurance and retirement are the two big ones.
Yep. And those are things that, again, if you're working with a great advisor and or attorney together, we're catching those because we're talking so much on behalf
Right.
of the client or the prospect. Another big one is estate planning. So obviously, you really are starting fresh with your own estate plan, particularly if you have a pretty large estate, and if it's taxable. You really need to work with then an estate planning attorney, again, potentially quarterbacked by a financial advisor, or if you have a connection directly with an estate planning attorney. But your wishes for your estate, if God forbid something happened to you, could be totally different than they were when you were living with your spouse.
Yep.
And that's one that, of all these items on the list, is probably neglected the most because nobody thinks they're going to die, right? But it's
Right.
really, really important that you go back and essentially just start from fresh, your own documents, power of attorney for healthcare. So who's making decisions on your behalf now if, God forbid, you're in a vegetated state? Power of attorney for financial, who's taking care of your finances, your bills, your financial decisions. Again, if you can't do those on your own, and your trust and your wills. So something else to consider. And the last thing I would say is just make sure that you have a solid team. It's not just using a financial advisor. It's not just using an estate planning attorney. It's not just using the divorce attorney. You really need all these parties representing you. I know that can sound costly, but in my experience, and I'm sure you can share the same, if you don't do that and you try to piecemeal together to save a few bucks, it's going to cost you in the long run because nobody's talking and working together on your behalf. So just make sure you have a professional team. They know each other. They're talking. They're representing you, so that you're going in, particularly during your negotiations, you're going in well armed and prepared for what you want to ask for, and you can source. This is why I'm asking for what I'm asking for based on what I actually need in my life.
Right.
So just make sure you have a solid team. So those are the ones that come to mind from the financial planning one. Are there any others from any other considerations? Again, if you're watching this, you're early in the process or you're in it, anything else that anybody should be thinking of?
I would say I've done a series of very short videos on my TikTok channel.
Oh, great.
And so I go through a lot of this, like questions to ask at your first meeting. How do you find an attorney? Like, what should you be prepared to discuss? What documents you should take with you? I've got videos on all that kind of stuff. And if anyone requests, happy to do a video on something if I haven't already done one.
Yep.
And that's Missouri specific.
Okay.
Just want to state that.
That's great. And we'll share, as we always do, we'll share all Sophie's information and even the link to all the videos. This has been great, really, really informative. Hope it's been helpful for you all. Please contact Sophie if you have any questions that relate to anything divorce or family law matters. And just appreciate you all joining us today on this episode. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thanks.